And to talk more about the development of the war in Ukraine and how it is affecting inflation in ASEAN countries, we have now in our studio the European Union Ambassador to ASEAN, His Excellency Igor Driesmans. Good afternoon, His Excellency. It's good to have you here in the studio.
Thanks
How
for
are
having
you?
me.
Yes. We would like to ask the permission from our viewers as well to take off our masks in order to have, the conversation more fluidly. And we have also adhered with the health protocol so far, right?
Yeah. Sir, the International Monetary Fund has said that countries in Asia have the potential to face what you call stagflation. So, due to the Russia and Ukraine war, how would you assess the situation?
Right. Well, basically, stagflation is two things. It's stagnation in terms of economic growth, and it's inflation. I think when it comes to stagnation, I may be not that pessimistic. I think even the IMF said that in the ASEAN countries, there would be 5.2, 5.3% of GDP growth still in 2022, if, of course, the war in Ukraine doesn't escalate any further. I think what's happening on the inflation front is maybe more concerning, and of course it could have an impact on the GDP growth. And when you look at why this is happening, I think there's two factors. Firstly, there's the backlog of the COVID-19 pandemic. So supply chains have been heavily disrupted, which means that costs went up for anything coming from Asia to Europe. These containers, the prices doubled, quadrupled, and that has, of course, a knock-on effect on overall inflation. The second thing which happened is the Russian aggression in Ukraine, and that, in turn, had an effect on the oil price and the energy prices. If you think about it, basically, Russia and Ukraine, taken together, are responsible for 11% of the global oil exports and 20% of the gas exports. So obviously anything that happens there has a knock-on effect on inflation. Also, the inflation is being felt in the area of food.
Yes.
And again, that is due to the war in Ukraine and the Russian aggression there. Unfortunately, what we saw is that Russia has blocked the exports of wheat and grain from Ukraine to the rest of the world. And we know how important the Ukraine is in terms of exports of this grain and wheat. As a matter of fact, I think it was the UN who said that 25 million tons of grain are stuck. There goes something.
It's all right.
Are stuck in Ukrainian ports, basically not able to export them because they're blocked at the Black Sea. So all of these things create inflation, and that should be of concern to all of us.
So as you said, it's the as the time we're just recovering from the COVID pandemic, economic crisis, and now there's this conflict in Eastern Europe, Russia and Ukraine. How do you see this goes to our commodity prices here in ASEAN countries especially? Do you think it is still going to be higher, and probably also that we have problems with the food security as well, since the Ukrainian wheat cannot go outside of the country? And what is the EU role here in ASEAN?
Well, I think the EU and ASEAN, we have a special role, a special responsibility, in the sense that we both believe in multilateralism. We both believe in a rules-based international order. Not might makes right, but rules should govern how we behave as states with each other. And that's why we should together speak up when those rules are not abided by, when we see such flagrant violation of international law as we've seen in Ukraine, such violent breach of the basic principles of the UN Charter. And of course, that's the origin of the problem that we're seeing when it comes to commodity prices, when it comes to inflation. So I think both EU and ASEAN, we should, as we have, speak out to call for a stop of the violence, to call for a return of some common sense in this bloody conflict.
Would that then make a better inflation rate in ASEAN, you think, if we do that together, is what you
Well, I think what's really the priority now is basically two things, going back to what I said before. One, we need to ensure that supply chains are restored, and we should argue for that. And two, we should stop the war. So it might not have an immediate impact tomorrow on the inflation rate, because again, this has a backlog of a somewhat longer period, including of the COVID period. But that's what really needs to happen for, say, global economy to kind of breathe again. Because let's not forget, what's happening on top of this is a speculation on the financial markets against oil, against gas, against wheat. So we need to take the oxygen out of that speculation.
Yeah, but when we're talking about global economy, we cannot, despite the fact that China is actually a big player in the economy of the world at the moment, but the inflation came amid China's economic slowdown. And then we're now talking about ASEAN as a region, and this will intensify pressure and uncertainty in the region, if I may say so. What is the role of the EU in its cooperation with China and also ASEAN in helping the global economy?
Right, well, the EU and China were basically responsible for 1/3 almost of the global GDP. So what we do together is important. And we have been speaking, of course, to China. There was a summit recently to also discuss these things. And I think the first things what we hope for is that, coming back to my point on supply chains, that there is no disruption of supply chains. And unfortunately, what we've seen is due to the spread of the Omicron variant in China and the Chinese zero COVID policy, there has been a substantial disruption even today in cities like Shanghai, which mean that a lot of the goods cannot leave Chinese ports. So that, again, has a knock-on effect on the overall inflation. It just means that the costs of any goods that are shipped out increase, which is not good for Indonesian economy, which is not good for any ASEAN economy, or indeed for the European economy. So that, I think, is the kind of priority number one. Apart from, I think what's true for what I said in terms of ASEAN, we also hope that China can speak out more forcefully on the war in Ukraine and call out the Russian aggression for what it is, which is basically a blatant violation of any international law.
All right. Now, between EU and ASEAN, there are still, big trades, especially Vietnam is the largest ASEAN partner for EU for imports, and Singapore is the largest ASEAN destination for EU exports of goods. And how do you see the situation right now where, now the EU countries are trying to phase out, its dependency on gas from Russia, for example, and probably the holdout of that, a lot of commodities as well in the region, in Eastern Europe. How do you see that opportunity now opens more in the ASEAN or Asia-Pacific region?
I think what the war tells us and what the increase of inflation tells us is one vulnerability which we as EU and ASEAN are both exposed to, and that is our dependency on fossil fuels. And it's because we are so dependent on fossil fuels that we're so vulnerable to inflation in oil and gas. That's why it's important that we work on a green transition, and that's why it's important that ASEAN works on a green transition. Now, ASEAN set a goal for itself, which is that by 2025, the share of renewable energy should be 23% of its overall energy portfolio. Now, I think ASEAN countries are around 17%. I think what we should do is accelerate that process so that we get to a broader share of ASEAN, of renewable energy, in ASEAN quicker, because it's good for the climate, but it also shelters you against inflation in the future from fossil fuels. Apart from that, of course, we need to work on smoother and more trade between EU and ASEAN. And that's what we've been promoting for the last years. We have a free trade agreement with Singapore. We have one with Vietnam. We hope to conclude one soon with Indonesia as well, so that we can increase trade and have better trade, so to speak, with
if you look at Indonesia specifically then, what kind of trade do you think that will be potential in the near future, looking at our country, and probably there are some potentials that are unlocked yet?
There is huge potential for more trade between EU and Indonesia. I mean, if you look at it, European market, the biggest single market in the world, basically, and Indonesia, this huge up-and-coming star in the world, which, with its growing middle class, so a lot of consumers for European products as well, if you look at it from an economic point of view. So when it comes to services, when it comes to goods, when it comes to financial services, I think there's so much prospect for an EU-Indonesia FTA.
Now, we were talking about ASEAN as a region, as a whole, and if we're looking back on the price surge of the fossil fuel, or let's say some of the countries in Europe has been adapting a green, so-called green energy. Let's say German, for instance, they're actually doing from gas, and the problem in Russia and Ukraine, namely being the supply of gas from Russia, is actually now being blocked because of this. Is there any country in ASEAN that you see could actually be the replacement for the gas supply for EU?
In terms of actual production of gas, I think there's a number of candidates, but I think that the real shift that needs to happen, in our view, is through renewable energy. Otherwise, you create new dependencies to other countries. So I think we need to go fully into solar energy, into wind energy, into LNG, into all of these renewable energies that are out there, and that what is needed is technology, what is needed is investment, and what is needed probably is to subsidize less fossil fuels so that you let the markets actually take care of it.
Well, I mean, it's never been cheap as well. I mean, to shift to green economy, right? And we have our G20 coming to happen here in Indonesia as we hold the presidency. How do you see that as a potential, in your perspective, from EU perspective, to make this event of G20, to accelerate the global recovery in terms of economy, and what kind of role that you think Indonesia should have in this G20 presidency this year?
I think Indonesia has a crucial role when it comes to chairing the G20 at such a crucial time for our global economy. So when it comes to coordination of the economic recovery, when it comes to making sure that even our central banks talk to each other about whether or not to tighten monetary policy and so on and so forth. There's no better place than the G20 for this to happen. At the same time, it's an opportunity to, as I say, prepare for the economic recovery of tomorrow, for the growth of tomorrow, which again should be green in order for it to be sustainable, not just from a climate point of view, but also to shelter us from the current inflation.
And looking from this conversation, I see that actually the light at the end of the tunnel in terms of the cooperation between EU and ASEAN, and the US and ASEAN summit just took place. Will there be any EU-ASEAN summit in the future?
Well, the short answer is yes.
Good to know that.
So this is a small announcement for your viewers. Normally by the end of the year, we hope to host in Brussels all of the ASEAN leaders. It's going to be slightly cold that period of the year, but they will be very warmly welcome to the European Union institutions for, I think, cementing that for us so important ties between both both of our regions
Yeah.
to work on that common understanding of the world that we want, the world based on rules, based on multilateralism, based on free trade. So we look forward to hosting them in Brussels.
Oh, that's certainly a good news.
So many high-level meetings.
Exactly.
Right
And also, we've been talking about the
G20.
G20, fossil fuel, and so on and so forth. And we could only see from a couple of years back, the digital economy is also in the rising. In terms of that, do you see any potential cooperation in digital economy between EU and ASEAN, or probably if you could name any particular country in ASEAN that could do that kind of cooperation in the future in digital economy?
Right. Well, we basically with Singapore in particular, you asked for a specific country, we're probably most advanced in our discussions to try and establish some kind of a digital partnership.
Yeah.
So I think let's hope that, first of all, we are able to conclude that agreement with Singapore sooner rather than later, and that secondly, we can then expand to the entire region. But I think one discussion we have with all of them, with all of the ASEAN countries, is about data protection. I think it's everybody who lives in this digital world, especially people slightly younger than I am, they're confronted with all of these issues related to your privacy and what you do on the internet. So it's a conversation we're having with all of the ASEAN countries to try to make sure that the basic data protection rules are implemented, are accepted, are enshrined into law, and then are also enforced. It sounds slightly boring, data protection, but it's so crucial if you want your privacy on the net.
I agree. I mean, data breach is such a crucial and important problem to be addressed.
Yeah, that's right. And Indonesia is also working really hard to make on the projects and readiness to be able to bring it to the G20 as well in November in Bali. So, sir, if you could see the future potentials of cooperation, maybe in terms of trade, economy, and social culture, and other things between EU and ASEAN specifically, what are your hopes?
Okay.
That smile tells everything.
Well, first of all, I think we should conclude some kind of a green partnership between the EU and ASEAN to try together to tackle this other threat, apart from the COVID pandemic, which we all had to face, with this other major threat, which is climate change. So together, I think we should tackle this head on. That would be number one.
Yeah.
And number two is to work together on international security. As I said, we both believe in international law. We both believe in the rule of the law, also at sea, I might add. Now, there's so much we can do when it comes to cybersecurity, when it comes to maritime security. That definitely there is a lot of untapped potential there. And then, of course, the third one would be trade and economy, because I was just mentioning 5.3% of growth we expect in ASEAN, in the ASEAN world now. People in ASEAN might think, well, this is not that much. Well, compare it with the European growth projection, which is 2.7%. So I think still ASEAN is a rapidly growing market, and there's a huge potential for us to do more trade between the EU and ASEAN, to do more on infrastructure, to do more on, again, renewable energy, so many sectors in a way where the potential is untapped.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Igor Driesmans, for talking with us in the 3 Hour News Show, and hopefully we can talk again soon.
Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Take care.
Thank you.
All right, now everybody, we're set for another break.
But when we return, Caroline will deliver some economics and business updates, so stay with us on the 3 Hour News Show on C Today.